How to help your students stay organized. An interview with Lesley Martin.
You have kids, they grow up, and before you know it, it's time to plan for college.
Where do you start?
How much is it going to cost?
Will you qualify for financial aid?
Should you be looking into scholarships?
When will you be able to retire?
What about student loans?
The list of questions is never ending. The good news is, all the answers are right here. Welcome to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Here is your host, certified financial planner, Brad Baldridge.
Hello and welcome to Taming the High Cost of College. I'm your host, Brad Baldridge. Today we have a great interview with Lesley Martin. She is the founder and CEO of ClassTracker, and she's also worked as a teacher and academic coach and many other roles with students for the last 20 years. We're going to talk about ClassTracker, an organizer that she's developed for high school and college students. And we're going to have a lot of great discussions about how to help students stay organized. So if you're a parent that has a student that is not very organized and needs to improve, or even if you have a student that just loves the idea of being organized and is looking for additional products or ideas, this podcast is for you. As always, show notes are available at our website. Let's go ahead and jump into the interview. So today I'm talking with Lesley Martin. She's the founder and CEO of ClassTracker. Welcome, Lesley.
Thank you for having me here today, Brad.
All right, so ClassTracker, that's the company you founded, and I know you're involved in some organization and that type of thing, and also have some background. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you decided to start ClassTracker and a little bit of your history?
Sure. So I was a high school teacher for about 8 years, and I decided to take a break from teaching and see what other things might be out there. And so during that sabbatical, I started working with students one-on-one and as a tutor, helping them with their assignments. That was my job. And I quickly realized as I was sitting with my students that we were spending at least half our time figuring out what they had to do in any given week and how they were going to do it. And then about half the time, maybe doing the assignments together. But there was this huge amount of time that we spent organizing both their stuff and, what they needed to do. And I had known from my experience in teaching that students who kept track of their assignments and got things done on time, those were the students who were most successful. And that the students that I was working with really needed something. They needed a tool to help them plan. Mm-hmm. And so I developed a weekly planning sheet. And I worked with students from many of whom went to the school that I had taught. And so I geared that planning sheet to match the schedule of the school. And so we used this planning sheet week after week after week. The students, all of a sudden, I noticed two things. One, they became better planners. I was like, wow, look at, they can actually do this. Their brains were learning how to plan. And two, that this tool gave them the structure to be able to do so. And so I thought, well, gosh, this is kind of working. What if I could get just beyond my roster of students and maybe make a tool that could help more students, like maybe all the students that went to that school. And so I designed a planner. And I pitched it to the school that I had taught at. So they were kind to me and they said, yeah, we'll try this out. And that was when ClassTracker was born in 2005. And so from there, I over, the next course of the following 10 or 15 years, I grew that roster of one school to a roster of 40, and I made custom planners. So that's how the company was started. And then 5 years ago, I started saying, hey, wouldn't it be great if not just the kids who went to my schools, they weren't really my schools, but the schools that bought my planners, what if more students can use planners? And so I started a direct consumer arm of the business where I sell planners that are designed for specific educational levels, middle school, high school, and college online at classtracker.com.
Right. And obviously you because you were working with students, you built a tracking system. So how is your planner or your ideas different than if you just went to the office store and bought a weekly planner, so to speak?
Well, what I realized in all the time that I've been spending working with students one-on-one, I learned a lot more about adolescent brain development after I left the classroom. But what I've learned is the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that helps you to organize and prioritize and think about the future, is really developed. It's still developing. It isn't fully formed until you're 25 or so years old in some people. And so what I realized is that at each academic level, students needed a different structure to help them manage their times in their lives. So in middle school, you need a lot of structure. You can't give, this is exactly what I have to have for my math class and my English class and my social studies class. You need very specific buckets. And so the middle school planners are very structured. When you get into high school, students have all sorts of their lives become more full and rich, right? They might have a job after school, or they might have sports after school, or they might have reminders, and they have a lot of more tests and projects that are due. And so the weekly planning pages of those planners are structured. They have a structure that asks the kids sort of the question without being obvious, like, hey, what are those tests that you have this week? And they have a specific spot for it. What are the after school things you have this week? And there's a specific spot for it. And then when you get to college, it's also similar to the high school, except in college, your days look different every day, because one day you might have 4 classes, and another day you might have 0. And so you really need a spot in your planner to figure out, what am I going to do each day, and make a plan for that day. And so those planners have a special area for that. So it's an overlay of like, what does the brain need? How much structure does the brain need? Coupled with, what is that academic experience like?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they're different.
Right. So you spend a lot of time, obviously, working with students and then talking with parents and students and organization. You've had this discussion a lot as far as, so if a parent is starting to feel like, oh, my student's quote unquote disorganized and maybe could benefit from a planner or other planning techniques, I mean, what do you think the first step for a typical parent might be? Is it just buy them a planner and hand it off and say, here you go, use this? Or you need to sit down and teach them how to do it? Or what kind of resources or thoughts would you have around that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of people come to, looking for, parents, they see it. They see if their kids are struggling, and they're like, I need to help them, or I want to give them a tool, especially when you're in middle school, right? Mm-hmm. Like, oh, there's a lot going on. You go from being in a single classroom where everything happens in one room to, once you're in 6th grade, you start moving around, and every teacher can have a different system. So a lot of times parents will look for a planner, and they do, because of the way that mine are structured. It's sort of kind of intuitive. However, you ask a good question, and that is like, what can parents do? It's one thing to say, hey, I got you a planner, good luck. Right. It's another is, I got you a planner. I don't know if you know how to use it or not, but I'm happy to sit down with you and talk you through it. Or why don't you use it for a while and then show me how you're using it, and we can talk about if it's helping you or not. Mm-hmm. So I think there's different ways, like, obviously parents know their kids best and they know how they're going to respond, whether it's like, I will teach you, let's sit down and do it, or I will ask you how it's going and I'll be here for feedback. So that's just kind of how the parenting relationship is what I would say would dictate that.
Right.
And I think that, when you get to high school as an academic coach, that's when a lot of people call me. They sometimes call me in middle school, but it's mostly in high school, because that is a time when parents and students, their kids don't always want to hear what their parents have to say.
Right.
And so that becomes a little bit more difficult in terms, and that is where, at least if you hand off a product that is thoughtful, then there is a chance that it's intuitive enough that the kids are going to know a little bit about what to do with it.
Right. Absolutely. So my oldest, who's in college now, at his high school freshman year, first day of class, they handed out a planner to every student. And then I don't know exactly, but I think maybe the first 3 or 4 weeks they collected them just to, so they kind of forced them to at least try to use it. Whereas, again, I think that's a situation a lot of parents would deal with, is you hand off this planner and you see it sitting on the edge of the dresser or the corner of the desk and it hasn't moved for 6 weeks. So they're not using it. So let's talk a little bit about the motivational side of things. It's hard to help a student or a parent or anybody else for that matter that doesn't think they need the help or think they've got it. So what has your experience been around that process of talking or working with your student?
Yeah, I mean, when I work with kids privately, the way I bring them into my coaching practice is the first thing I do is I ask them to fill out an online form. And in that online form, the Google form, it asks them a lot of questions.
Mm-hmm.
And the first question I ask is, when you think about school on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being a lot and 1 being none, how stressed do you feel? And so oftentimes, if kids have something above a 7, that means that they are internalizing the discomfort that the disorganization is causing them.
Mm-hmm.
And so oftentimes when I ask them, we go through all these different parts of executive function categories. We talk about like, well, how's your backpack look? Is it, tidy or not? Does that make you feel stressed? No, it doesn't make me feel stressed. Okay, move on. But when you can find the nugget where I'm like, if we fix this a little bit, would that help alleviate your stress? Then you can find the motivation.
Mm-hmm.
So most kids don't want to feel stress. Most adults don't want to feel stress. And there's healthy stress, which is what I would call pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's unhealthy stress where you can't sleep at night or your stomach hurts or whatnot. And where you have these negative physical manifestations of stress. And so oftentimes when I'm talking to kids, I look for the openings where I can tell that we can turn the conversation into, hey, I think that maybe you could feel less stressed if you did X. Would you be willing to try that? And that's where I think you can get the motivation.
Right. And if organization is an issue, you could, like for my son, we worked with essentially an uncle when it was time to write the essays because we knew it would be hard for us to coach him just because of the parent dynamic. So someone that's not, that's around him all the time, they could have very structured conversations around the essays and that type of thing was useful. So I think that might be another situation where maybe it's not mom or dad that's trying to instill organization. Maybe it's somebody else, a coach, a teacher, an aunt or uncle or friend or whatever that might be helpful there.
Or even an older sibling sometimes,
yes.
Right?
Yes. And again, I think another thing to talk about is the transition from high school to college is another big transition because most high schools that I'm aware of have a website where even an inquiring parent can dig in and see where all the assignments are and what all the tests and test scores are. But when you get to college, a lot of times there is no, here's where all the assignments that wherever assigned show up. There is, and it's the first time for a lot of kids that are going to say, oh, when the professor said we have a test next Thursday, if I didn't write it down, then it's gone forever because I can't go back and look it up on a website, or maybe it's on a syllabus. But again, it's the requirement to keep things organized, I think, shifts strongly from the organization to the individual in college.
Yes, it does. And I think that, what I've noticed in the past few years is there actually has been a greater migration in middle school, high school, and universities to have everything, at least assignments and things like that, listed online. So they're mostly out there. Now, to your point, if you're in high school, your parents can often get a login to that online system and they can see your grades. There's all sorts of stuff they can see, which that's a whole different topic. Mm-hmm. And in college, those systems exist as well. I think that the greatest challenge for students, those systems are in place, right? So they know I know how to look up on my syllabus. But I think really, when I think about the transition from high school to college, what I see is the biggest challenge for kids is that they go from a very structured, you go to school at this time and end the day at this time, and then you have your activities in high school, to you go to college and all of a sudden you have a lot of unstructured time. And some
Right.
kids might call that free time. And so what happens is that, as we know, in college and universities, those courses require plenty of work outside of your actual class. So you might go to class for 3 hours a week, but that might mean that you still have about 9 hours of work that you need to do to support what's going on in that class.
Right.
And oftentimes students neglect to put into their personal schedule time dedicated to each of their classes outside of class. So one of the tips that I like to offer to students when they go to college is, look, you have to map out your week. And the first layer of that map is, when are you in classes?
Mm-hmm.
The next layer is, when are you in other things? Like if you have a job, when are you at work? If you are playing a sport, when are your practices? If you do some extracurriculars or clubs, when are those things? And that's the next layer. So I think about tissue paper. The first layer is your classes. On top of that, you layer on those extra things that are commitments. And then what you see after that is the empty blocks that are left. And it's in those empty blocks that I encourage students to block out what I call study blocks.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, you're going to have on Monday, you have 4 hours in the afternoon, put, 2 hour-and-a-half study blocks in there. Give yourself a break in between, but put 2 hour-and-a-half study blocks there so that you know, okay, it's Monday at this time, I'm going to go get some work done.
Right.
Because if it's not scheduled and planned out, it's really easy to think, oh, I can do it later. I've got plenty of time. I've got all this free time. But in fact, that's not true.
Right. Absolutely. It reminds me of way back a long time ago when I was in college. I had a friend that was very disciplined around that. And between classes, he would go to the library or go find a quiet place or whatever, instead of coming back to the house that we were living in and watching Days of Our Lives or whatever it was that we were, some silly thing that we did. But then at 7:00 every evening, he was done because he had already done all his studying and all that type of stuff. And then he could go do whatever he wanted. He was fun. He could do his fun. He could go out, whatever it was. And I mean, I didn't even realize what he was doing until I was, 10 years later, I was fully an adult and looked back at it and said, oh, that made a lot of sense. I don't know why I didn't recognize it at the time for sure. And so I think a lot of students are in that boat where they don't even know what they're up against and it's kind of new to them. And that's where parents can, again, give them some guidance, talk about it a little bit. Maybe it'll stick or maybe it won't, but at least they've seen it or heard about it prior to them learning the hard way that, oh, I really need to organize a few things here and there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a woman named Frances Jensen who wrote a book called The Teenage Brain. And she talks about in that book, as a parent, what you can do with your adolescents is do sort of future scenario planning, right? So when things are not in the moment, you could just say, hey, you're going to college next year. Your life's going to be looking really different. Tell me how you're thinking about managing your schedule. What plans might you have? They may not have a plan, but just the fact that you as a parent say, hey, that is a good idea, it might make them think about it. And then you can have that conversation again. Like, hey, when we talked a couple weeks ago, you didn't really have much thought about a plan. Have you given it any more thought? I'm just, I really want to make sure you are set up for as much success as you possibly can. And I would love to hear what you're thinking. So there can be ways in which, because as kids get older and they're 18 years old, they're adults, right? So we have to give them the agency, or at least the first pass is at least you try and give them the agency to come up with something and have a conversation about it.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, the truth is that for a lot of students and a lot of families, sending your kid to college and a kid going to college is a big deal. Mm-hmm. It's a big financial investment, which obviously you are an expert in. And anytime you make a big investment, it's probably a good idea to think it through a little bit and have a plan. So it's kind of a good precursor to thinking about how you make spend money in the future is like, it is an investment. So how are you going to make the most of it?
Right. So let's say we're starting to get into this organizational thing and we're realizing that maybe we're in over our head, both as parents and as the student. You mentioned that you do some coaching or did some coaching around that. I think that's the first point I'd like to make is there are people out there that teach this stuff for a living, and they might know 7 different ways to be organized and help your student pick the one that's going to work for them or whatever it is. But can you speak a little more to that process, or again, being the expert, where how you can help compared to what a parent might do by, quickly reading a book and trying to do it on the fly?
Yeah, for sure. So there has been this blooming industry called academic coaches, and they've, that term didn't exist a few, call it 10 years ago. And now there's a lot of people who are academic coaches. And really what's lovely about an academic coach is that they can work with your student in a very non-judgmental, supportive way. And not that parents mean to be judgmental, but sometimes kids will feel judged by their parents. And what happens when you have a coach is that, I'll tell students that look, I'm the number one member of your fan club. I'm here to support you. I'm here to help you. And I am able to offer and lend expertise because I've worked in schools and because I've worked with so many students that I have a greater breadth and depth of understanding of different strategies, techniques, tools, etc., that to support a kid's to learn more about these sort of executive function skills. Parents are not experts in this. It's hard to say, oh, okay, well, if I'm not a particularly organized person and now I'm trying to help my kid who's not very organized, that's not fun for anybody. Mm-hmm. And so there are people who are professionals. That said, it costs money, and I'm sensitive to that.
Right.
And so there are ways in which certainly in colleges and universities, there are academic support centers. There are places you can go that they will help you.
Right.
Whether it's a writing center or more and more and more, there are time management organizations, and there are programs at colleges that are meant to help and support students. There are actually courses that are offered for a lot of first-year students. They have a how are you going to be successful in college kind of introduction course. So I think that there is an understanding that those skills are needed to be taught. And it's a matter of looking to see what resources are out there. So some of them, yes, you can pay for someone like me. And I certainly know that there are others that are available as part of your, your college education.
Right. Absolutely. So the last idea is, again, the generational divide between parents and students, where most parents that went to college, I distinctly remember that I just barely was able to use a computer to write a paper. Just a couple of years before, it was a typewriter. And it was just fantastic that we had access to computers and printers where we could, be able to edit a paper and not have to try and type it and all that kind of fun. And then, of course, but now we're all the way to students perhaps doing this all in an app on their phone. Or can you speak to, obviously your company makes paper planners still, and you didn't make the app, so to speak. Is there advantages or disadvantages of paper compared to the app that a student might think they're going to do instead? Or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, sure. So I will say my blanket statement is, first of all, everyone needs a system to manage their time and stay organized. And I don't care if that system is an electronic system, a paper system, or some combination of the two. As long as you have something that works for you, that is the most important thing. So from the beginning, I will say, a system that works is a good system. I'm partial to paper for a number of reasons. Mm-hmm. Right now, in the world that we live in, the way our human brains are built is we're prone towards distractions. Mm-hmm. Okay, so, and there is nothing more distracting than our digital devices.
Yes.
So when one is trying to focus and think and plan and organize, you don't want to be distracted.
Right.
And so there is a huge utility in using paper as a device to help you plan, because paper does not have alerts.
Mm-hmm.
It does not have notifications. And that when you open it up, you can look at, okay, here's the plan I made. Here's what I told myself I'm going to do. It's in front of me. If you put your plan on your device, there is a very good chance, very, very good chance that when you go to look for the plan that you've carefully thought through and put together, that all of a sudden you might be at YouTube watching a video.
Yes.
Like you could easily get distracted. And so the way the brain works is we are prone towards distractions. And what I understand and believe and know to be true is that paper is not distracting.
Yes, I think that's huge. I see that myself with when you have to go get online and I got to go find that email to get the answer. And of course, when you open your email program, there's a couple new ones. So I may as well read them first. So then you go down that hole for a while. Then you close the email and you go back to what you were doing. And then you say, oh, that's right. I was going to go look up that number in the email. Right. So I just spent a half an hour looking up a number and I didn't look up the number. So I think we all can relate to that. And I think there's a lot of people out there that just love paper. So, and I think sometimes when students try it, they love it, but they have to be encouraged to try it. And I think that's...
Well, right. And I think that a lot of times too, one of the things that there's a lot of pushback when you talked about like, oh, I buy my kid a planner and then it sits on its desk for 6 weeks and never gets used.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times because of this migration of putting syllabus and assignments online, students don't think, they're like, oh, I don't need to write anything down in my planner because it's all up there.
Right.
Up there. It's all online. I can look it up. But really what I want people to do with a planner and when I work with students is I say like, okay, yes, it's all up there, but let's pull it down and let's put it in the spot where you're going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you have this list of, one of my expressions that I coined is a list is not a plan. Online is one big series of lists. So you have all these things up there, but you haven't actually taken those items and planned out when and where and how you're going to do them. And that's where a paper planner is super effective. So yes, my planner, I have one coming out for adults. It's not out yet, but it's coming.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm been using it. And what's nice about the way I use it is I have my list on it. So when, let's say you and I are having a conversation, I say, oh, we'll be talking and I'll know there's a follow-up item. So I'll jot it down in my planner. And then later on, I'll move it to where I'm going to actually do it. Or if it's like, I know Lesley write a thank you note to Brad and I put it for a week from now or tomorrow on my to-dos, I just enter it on that day. So some of it requires more thinking about when you're going to do it, and others you just put it on the day. But the point being is that you deconstruct the long list. So long lists are intimidating, but if you spread them out across many days, then it seems tangible. It seems doable. And that also can help with motivation. A lot of times kids get really overwhelmed. They get behind. They think I'm never going to be able to do anything. They have this massive stack of things to do. And all they see is like all these things and they haven't mapped it out. Once you map it out, you're like, oh, I can do 2 things a day. It's totally doable.
Yes.
That's why I love paper.
Yes, I agree. And I think also having that big picture and the idea that you have to put it on your schedule in a time slot, as you get busier, it helps you say no too. Where, hey, do you want to go do this next Thursday night? You open your planner and say, well, I've got this scheduled for Thursday night. And there's nowhere I can move it to. So now I have to say no to something and I have to start prioritizing. And I think that's where it's a challenge for a lot of kids to realize that if I say yes to these immediate gratifications now, then all this stuff I'm saying no to is going to pile up. And this weekend, I'm going to spend it all weekend doing my homework because I was led astray and I did something that wasn't all that much fun. I might have much rather had a free weekend, but I just, I blew it in my overall organization.
Yeah. And I mean, this is a little bit of a tangent, but related. Students, what I've noticed in the work I've done with students privately, specifically students who have attention deficit disorders, that the tendency of those students is procrastination. Mm-hmm. It's just part of the way, because the ability to look into the future is just really, it's very much about the moment. So what I've noticed when I have students who will lay things out in the planner is they actually procrastinate less, because they can see just what you said. They can see like, oh no, I've got like a mock trial all weekend. There is absolutely no way I can do anything on the weekend. And I have all these things to do. So I have to do them now.
Right.
So I will do it later. Or in your case, like Thursday is the only time I have to do it. So I have to do it. It's very powerful. It's very powerful.
Right. Absolutely. All right. Well, we've learned a ton about it. And I guess there's one other real quick thing I want to talk about. You've got a book out there called Where's My Stuff? Can you tell us a little about that book and who should maybe read it and a little more there?
Yeah, sure. Where's My Stuff I would say it's great for middle school parents and maybe a middle schooler. It's a real fun read about how to, manage and organize your stuff. And there's a lot of different, some of it was written quite a while ago at this point now when, maybe digital wasn't as dominant it is now. So there's a lot of information about how to organize paper, which still is relevant, but maybe not as relevant. There's also another book I wrote called Make the Grade, and that is more of a book written for high school students and their parents. And it's really, sort of takes a lot of what I learned as an educator and as a tutor and as a coach and helps students to understand some of the concepts we talked about and layered on as well, study skills, self-advocacy skills, things like that. So it's a little bit of a guide to how to do well in high school.
Wow, great. Okay. Well, I appreciate it. If people want to learn more about your planners and that type of thing, can you give us your website or however else they can find them?
Yes, please visit ClassTracker.com. That's ClassTracker.com.
Great. I appreciate it, and we'll stay in touch.
Great. Thanks so much, Brad. Super fun.
All right. That was a great interview. Thank you, Lesley. Hopefully you've learned a lot about staying organized. I would encourage you to go ahead and check out the ClassTracker website and look at some of her products. They can be customized. They would make a great graduation gift or Christmas gift for students. And also she has some good books out there that you can track down. All right. That's all we have for today. I look forward to talking to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Now it's time for you to take action. Head to tamingthehighcostofcollege.com for show notes, bonus content, and to leave feedback for Brad. The next step on your college journey starts now.
Brad Baldridge is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research and an investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Brad owns two companies, Baldridge Wealth Management and Baldridge College Solutions. The Baldridge companies are not affiliated with Cambridge Investment Research.